I think that the Semarang example is really fun because the Semarang revitalization project started with one building, Lawang Sewu, which is a very famous building in Indonesia because it's a gedung hantu, ya. Ada kuntilanak.
Yeah, spooky kind of.
I was so scared. I refused to go into the basement. Ya, saya takut ada kuntilanak di sana.
Sobat kajian, berjumpa kembali di dalam bincang kajian Badan Strategi Kebijakan Luar Negeri Kementerian Luar Negeri. Saya, Madi Sentanajaya, akan memandu jalannya bincang kajian kita kali ini. Bersama saya pada saat ini ada dua orang tamu yang sangat spesial, yakni Bapak Michael Gevan dan juga Bapak Sedomir Nestorovic. Mereka hadir dalam kegiatan Kongres Indonesianis Dunia ke-7 yang diadakan dari tanggal 12 hingga 13 November 2025 di kampus Universitas Islam Internasional Indonesia di Depok, Jawa Barat. Bapak Michael Gevan adalah seorang ahli atau profesor sejarah dari Universitas California di Sacramento, ya, dan Bapak Sedomir adalah seorang ahli yang telah malang melintang di bidang pendidikan dan juga keahlian beliau adalah di bidang political sciences, dan saat ini beliau tinggal di Singapura dan mengajar pada Center for Forecast and Analysis sejak 1986 di Kementerian Luar Negeri Prancis dan juga beberapa kegiatan lainnya. Pada kesempatan hari ini, tanggal 13 November, beliau berdua telah menyampaikan presentasi yang terkait dengan bidang keahlian masing-masing dan tentunya akan menarik bagi kita semua untuk mengetahui lebih dalam lagi dari pemikiran-pemikiran yang beliau berdua telah sampaikan di dalam Kongres Indonesianis Dunia pada kali ini. Kita akan mulai dengan pertanyaan kepada Profesor Sedomir Nestorovic, ya, dalam kaitannya Cultural and Religious-Based Diplomacy, Indonesia's Halal Economic Cooperation with the Middle East. Prof. Nestorovic, how are you today? It's okay.
Thank you very much.
Did you enjoy the Congress?
I'm very grateful for the invitation. I saw fantastic people here, but also a fantastic place. So I knew the university from last year, but now it's even better because last year not everything was open, but now everything is open, so it's very nice.
Good. Thank you very much, Professor Nestorovic, for your very kind words. So, based on the presentation that you have presented today, there are some, of course, interesting things that we would like to know. First, how does this Indonesia's halal economy reflected the Bandung spirit in fostering South-South cooperation, in particularly with the Middle Eastern nations?
It's a very good question because the Bandung spirit is holding together these two things. So one thing is the respect of independence, and the other thing is the engagement and peaceful cooperation with the others. In 1955, not all countries of the Middle East were independent. We have to wait the 70s, for instance, for the top countries to become independent. So the spirit is to say we are here to help. So Indonesia is a big country, we chemical, but it was not so much developed in 1955. But as soon as it developed, obviously other countries are turning to Indonesia as a country to help. So on one side, respect of independence, on the other side, the willingness to help.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Professor Nestorovic, for your very comprehensive answer. So now we move to Professor Michael Van. Michael Van is a historian. His expertise is in Southeast Asian history, colonialism, and imperialism. Yeah. So I believe that Indonesia is not a strange country for you. So I believe that you've been visited Indonesia for many times, Professor Van.
Actually, Indonesia is the reason I became a historian. I fell in love when I was a teenager in Hawaii. I learned about Indonesia and fell in love with Indonesian history. And most of my work has been in Vietnam, but now I'm focused back on Indonesia. And when I was working in Vietnam, I'd say, saya kerja di Vietnam, tetapi hati di sini, di Indonesia. Yeah.
It's a wonderful bahasa that you use. Thank you very much. And we have a question, Professor Van. How can Indonesia's historical neighborhoods serve as cultural bridges in South-South diplomacy, especially among these political post-colonial nations?
Yeah, I know. I think that's a really good question, and it gets to the heart of the issue in that the post-colonial nations have this legacy, have this patrimony of sometimes very gorgeous, very impressive buildings, but built by foreigners, built in a time when they did not have their freedom, independence. And it's a shared problem of having this kind of problematic legacy, but also a shared opportunity, because these buildings can serve as aspects of a nation's history, but also as tourism anchors. And especially for municipalities, they can be real key anchors for revitalizing a neighborhood and attracting domestic tourists and international tourists. The question is how to do this in a way that is informed of a complicated history, sensitive to the difficult issues, shows respect to those issues, but then still makes the place inviting for the public. Because people on vacation don't want to be lectured to by a professor. Trust me, I'm a professor. No one wants that on lecture. So it's a complicated issue, but it's, for your question, it's an opportunity for Indonesia to work with other ASEAN partners or partners around the global South that have this problem/opportunity of these older colonial districts.
Yeah, I think you made a very good point there. So I'm back to Professor Nestorovic for the next questions. Professor, in what ways can this Islamic marketing serve as a tool for Indonesia to build cultural affinity and trust among the fellow Muslim majority countries?
So the question of trust is a central one. So we are using the term amana in Arabic concerning trust, and it is a fundamental element concerning the relationship between people, but also the relationship between corporations and the relationship between states. Without trust, we cannot have this. And of course, we can say trust has nothing to do with religion. I understand this, but it happens that the great majority of people in Indonesia are Muslim, and that the people that are going to the global south, especially in the Middle East or in Africa, they are also Muslim. I think we can also use this concept of trust in order to deal with them, because the trust is also found in the economy itself. Because for halal, if you are looking for the halal certification, it is a question of trust. In Islamic finance, if you are looking for the Sharia supervisory board, it's also a question of trust. So trust is present everywhere, and we should not be shy of this. We usually believe people are moved by rational interest, but interest is not the same as trust. So there are two different things, and Indonesia can use trust when addressing the other countries.
Thank you very much. And back to Professor Van. what lesson can you think Indonesia can offer from its various heritage tourism efforts to other global south countries in their effort to seeking to reclaim and to reinterpret colonial spaces?
Yeah, I think that lessons or examples that Indonesia can offer, two very specific ones. One is the Kota Tua neighborhood of North Jakarta, and the other is the Kota Lama neighborhood of Semarang. And the Kota Tua example is a really successful project of taking a section of the city that was 15 years ago very run down, abandoned buildings and not very friendly and inviting, and they steadily revitalized the buildings, rebuilt the buildings, created a walkable, friendly public space that's now very popular. You go on the weekends and it's so different than 20 years ago when nobody would be there. Lots of people, lots of young people. I think that the Semarang example is really fun because the Semarang revitalization project started with one building, Lawang Sewu, which is a very famous building in Indonesia because it's a Gedung Hantu, yeah?
Gedung Hantu, yeah.
At a Kuntilanak.
Spooky kind of.
So it was a famous building for this story that comes from Indonesian culture, right? But it's a building that comes from a Dutch colonial period. And the building shows how these sites could be reinterpreted with local culture. And so it served as the anchor project for Semarang. It was the first building to be refurbished. It was immediately a big success. Lots of tourists, many there because of the ghost, but then many there when they visited appreciated the style of architecture and then learned a bit of the history. Why this was a center of a railway station. It intersects with the history of Indonesian railway workers and also the intersection of World War II. So it's sort of a wedge into learning some more history. So I think the Kota Tua and Lawang Sewu serve as these really good examples for other countries.
Yeah. I saw your picture at Lawang Sewu in Semarang.
And it's so fun because it's the house of 1,000 doors. Eh?
You were not scared during the time?
I was so scared. I refused to go into the basement. Yeah, saya takut ada kuntilanak di sana.
Atmosphere is different. Yeah,
But I've gotten to know the Ibu Augustina, the mayor of Semarang, and she told me that the ghosts are gone. She assured me. She said, "Don't be afraid anymore. You can go in."
Good, thank you. So back to Professor Nestorovic. Professor, do you see Indonesia's halal diplomacy as a model for other global South nations seeking to integrate faith-based values into economic partnership?
So far, Indonesia did not use very much halal diplomacy for many reasons. But in the future, it could be probably a good way, because if you are going back to the question of trust, especially in Western countries, but also in many Muslim countries, where they are not aware about the halal procedures, about the halal certificates, about the halal standards, I think that Indonesia can play a role in this, in helping them. I'm thinking about sub-Saharan Africa, for instance, but also in some other places in the world. So Indonesia could use it. So far, it did not, but it doesn't mean it will not in the future.
Yeah, sure. That's a good point made, Professor Nestorovic, and of course there will be good advice for us to utilize more and optimize our diplomacy in this kind of area. Thank you for that. And back to Professor Van. Professor, how might Indonesia's historical sites contribute to a shared narrative of resistance, resilience, and solidarity within the global South?
Yeah. No, I think that's another great opportunity for South-South relations and discussions and partnerships with how to sort of build a narrative around these sites that make them Indonesian history or Vietnamese history or Malaysian history, like part of the national historical narrative, not something that's separate and isolated. And again, I think Lawang Sewu is a great example because the building played a very important role in the revolution in 1945, the resistance against the Japanese and then against the Dutch. And historical events happened at that building, and there's markers at that building, so people can visit them and to walk in the place where there was anti-colonial resistance. That's a powerful feeling.
Yeah, I do agree with you. Thank you very much. Thank you. And Professor Nestorovic, what institutional or policy innovations could Indonesia pursue to strengthen its leadership in the halal economy across the global south?
I do believe that Indonesia should work a multi-channel approach. The first channel should be I would say the institutional one. So with the Ministry of Religious Affairs, because this is the ministry which is in charge of the halal. So in that case, you continue for the standards and for the certifications. The second one is the MUI, the Majlis Ulama Singapore in Indonesia, which is let's say the umbrella organization concerning the religious institutions that we have in Indonesia. And the last one will be companies. Companies, they do the job. So you bring Indomie and you tell Indomie, we go with you and we will present how Indomie was doing in halal, and maybe this could be an example for the others.
Yeah, sure. So it takes the whole stakeholders in the nation.
That's right. Not just one. You have several channels and you have to work on all channels.
Exactly. Thank you. Okay, and then back to Professor Van. Professor, do you see potential for Indonesia to lead regional collaborations in creating public history for diplomatic and educational purposes?
Absolutely. I think Indonesia has a lot of really successful public history sites. This is a conference in memory of 70 years of the Bandung Conference. Right, and that building, the Asia Africa building, is such a great preserved building. It's a very accessible museum. I think it serves as a fantastic model for others. I also think that in Jakarta, the National Maritime Museum, which is in some older Dutch colonial East India Company buildings, VOC buildings, but it uses the buildings to tell Indonesians' maritime history, representing different boats of different cultures around Indonesia. And I think it's a really excellent repurposing of that space to tell an Indonesian story, and I think could really serve as a model for other countries around Southeast Asia.
Very good. Back to Professor Nestorovic. How can Indonesia balance religious authenticity with market competitiveness in its halal diplomacy efforts?
So the religious authenticity is found its roots in Islam itself, and especially in the tolerant Islam that we have in Indonesia, contrary to some other places in the world. So in that case, it will be very easy to balance the faith on one side, business on the other, and institutional presence on the third. We don't have exclusiveness and we don't have rejection on the three sides of the triptych that I was mentioning here. So for me, because we have tolerant Islam in Indonesia, it would be easy to balance. If it was another school of fiqh or madhab, maybe it will be much more difficult.
Yeah, thank you. And Professor Van, how can Indonesia ensure that its heritage tourism promotes inclusive narratives and avoids commodifying historical trauma?
Well, harus kerja dengan dosen sejarah. You have to bring in the historians, bring in the history professors. And I think that for many of the cultural heritage sites in Indonesia, they have done a very good job consulting with academic expertise. This isn't always done, and there's some other places around Southeast Asia I will not name, don't want to cause a diplomatic problem, but there are some cultural heritage sites where they didn't do a good job consulting, and they just make it an Instagram spot, and there's no historical context, there's no information, and that's something that history professors are very excited to do. Like we want to be involved. We're like a puppy dog or a kitten. We want to play. We want to get involved. So I think tapping the excellent Indonesian historians and experts in Indonesian culture and the regional cultures of Indonesia, make sure that they're stakeholders in these revitalization projects is a method for success.
I agree with that. And Professor Nestorovic, could you share some examples where Indonesia's halal initiative have helped deepen diplomatic or cultural ties?
So so now we have, for instance, Indonesia has been chosen as the center of excellence from some companies. When you take Nestle, in the 80s, Nestle has decided to make Kuala Lumpur its center of excellence. Okay, but a few years back, Unilever, which is the arch rival of Nestle, has chosen Indonesia. So it speaks a lot, because if a multinational company size of Unilever has recognized that Indonesia is maybe the future for halal, this is why they are coming here. They didn't go to another country, so it's coming there. Another one can be the French company Danone. Danone is very much present in confectionery, but also in water. So the brand, which is called Aqua, is very present here in Indonesia, and they're also exporting it to other countries. So I see Aqua in Singapore. It is not produced in Singapore, it is produced in Indonesia, and it is exported to Singapore. So we have examples of companies which have recognized that Indonesia can be a bright spot for the future. Now we are waiting that from the institutional side, they also recognize it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, sir. And for Professor Van, could you reflect on how Indonesia's historical memory intersects with its aspiration for leadership in the Global South?
So, I'm biased in my answer. I'm someone who fell in love with Indonesian history, right? And I teach Indonesian history. And I teach Indonesian history in the United States, where I will be honest and admit there is a lack of knowledge about Indonesia. I really think that Indonesia, as one of the fourth largest nation in the world, such an important history, needs to sell itself and needs to present itself as a central player in world history. And so I teach classes that cover the history of President Sukarno. And my students are amazed to find out that he was such an important world leader in the 1950s and the 1960s. It's left out of our curriculum. And I really think that Indonesia should assert its role in historical narratives. And that's why I find this conference so wonderful, commemorating the spirit of Bandung and recognizing that history and recognizing that there's a historical precedent for Indonesia's global leadership. And Indonesia is a big nation and should walk with pride like a big nation. Yeah.
Thank you. Last question for Professor Nestorovic. How might Indonesia collaborate with other Global South countries to create a shared halal certification framework?
It's a crucial question. I attended the World Halal Forum more than 10 years ago in Kuala Lumpur. And at that time, in Malaysia, they set up a body, HDC, Halal Development Corporation, and the topic was this one: how to create one halal certification for the whole world. And they appointed a young guy, Hashim, and I was talking to the young guy, Hashim. Wow, when are we going to have one global certificate? And he told me, not in my lifetime. So it means we are far away from this situation. So today, Indonesia should work with Malaysia because Malaysia was the pioneer in this domain, but also with 3 other countries, with United Arab Emirates, because they're really aggressive in this, and the Brazilian manufacturers of halal meat, they are all present there. With Saudi Arabia is also working on that, and finally with Turkey. Turkey is also a secular country, but they have recognized that there is a huge opportunity there. So I think that there's 5 countries, Indonesia, Malaysia, Saudi, UAE, and Turkey should work together.
All right. Thank you. And Professor Van, are there examples of South-South cultural tourism partnership that Indonesia could emulate or expand?
Yeah, a couple examples come to mind in other parts of the world. In West Africa, for example, several of the nations, Ghana and Senegal, have done very, very sophisticated jobs with cultural and historical tourism sites related to the very difficult history of slavery, but presenting those in a way that is both appropriate but also engaging for the wider public. I think that in the Caribbean, there are also excellent examples of transnational museums and sites that talk about the African diaspora. And I think that Indonesia could really do something interesting with the maritime culture of Southeast Asia. The greater Nusantara, the greater Dunia Malayu, right? I mean, this is the boundaries on the map in some ways are colonial creations, right? And there are shared histories and shared cultures from Aceh to the Philippines to eastern Indonesia. So I think those transnational models could be very exciting. And it would also bring in, for tourism, it would bring in Filipino tourists, Malaysian tourists, Singapore tourists, Thai, Cambodian, and so forth, and stress the transnational history that Indonesia has had in the region.
And I have one last wrap-up questions, the same question to both of you. So, but I would like to, Professor Nestorovic to answer this first, and then Professor Van later on. If we were to imagine a Bandung 2.0 moment today, what cultural or religious initiatives should Indonesia champion to lead the way?
I would imagine, first of all, to do it, of course, on the international scale, but also on the national scale. Because maybe the young people, they don't know very much about the Bandung spirit. So in that case, they also have to be involved in this. So it should not be only an institutional approach, but the civil society should also be involved in that. Otherwise, it will stay on the diplomatic level, it will stay on the institutional level, and it will not go deep to the society. So I see many initiatives, either coming from education or coming from religious institutions or coming from any other kind of institutions which are not state, non-state organizations, which can also participate in that. So that's one thing. And the second thing, in 1955, all countries wanted to be secular. All countries wanted to build an independent country. They were not concerned with the faith thing. But today, we live in a different world. So since we live in a different world, we should not be afraid of talking about religion. I understand that sometimes secular countries, they don't want to talk about that. But today the situation is different. So I think it should also be included in this preparation.
Interesting. How about you, Professor?
Well, I think an engagement with social media in a way that keeps social media from homogenizing global culture. Right? So one of the dangers of everyone having access to Instagram or other social media apps is that everything becomes the same. But what I would want to see is a spirit of Bandung that promotes local content creators to highlight their regional culture. So young people in Toraja talking about what's special about that part of Sulawesi, or young people in outside of Bukit Tinggi talking about the distinctive aspects of budaya Minangkabau, and using this infrastructure that's been created by the global North to celebrate the diversity and strength of the global South. And I think that could be really a democratization and the representation of culture, and to keep these traditions alive that are really at risk of disappearing and being homogenized.
Sure, wonderful. So, gentlemen, once again, I thank you very much for this, for your very insightful thoughts and perspective on our team today about the reviving Bandung spirit, and the inputs that you gave to us through the Congress, and also through this dialogue are valuable, very full of many excellent ideas and advices to us to move forward, to become rising power for the global South. So thank you very much for this opportunity. It's such an honor for us to have you here in Depok today. Thank you very much once again. Teman-teman pemirsa Bincang Kajian, demikian tadi dialog yang kami lakukan bersama Profesor Michael Van dan juga Profesor Sedomir Nestorovic. Banyak hal yang menarik yang telah disampaikan oleh para narasumber kita, dan tentunya akan menjadi masukan yang berharga bagi kita semua dalam kaitan mengembangkan potensi Indonesia menjadi kekuatan di Global South. Demikian kami akhiri bincang kajian pada kesempatan kali ini. Sampai bertemu lagi di bincang kajian berikutnya. Terima kasih.